Okay, we'll go ahead and get started here. Welcome to our breakout session. My name is David Hancock. I am the 9th grade core teacher here, which means that I teach all of the 9th graders in history, English, and their writing class. It's something that I really enjoy. I've just finished my 4th year here at American Heritage, and I'll be starting my 5th year, so I really enjoy it. With me here today is Katie Homestead and her son Nathan Homestead. He just finished the 9th grade, so I'm going to talk about theory and he's going to talk about practice, and let us know how it really worked out. I'm also fortunate enough to have another parent from my class that just came. This is Gerlach here, so maybe she wants to chime in too, so feel free to raise your hand.
Angela's on her own.
And, you know, the funny thing is, that's pretty much what Katie said, too. We asked her to come, and she says, well, what do you want me to say? And we said, well, we want you to talk about how you helped your student get through this. And he says, well, I didn't really do anything. They're pretty much on their own.
Just too many kids.
And that is something that we strive to try to do in the high school, is we try to get them to be much more independent. And we start that in the 9th grade, where they are responsible for their own homework. We don't have quite the level of communication with parents that we do in the younger grades. The students are primarily responsible for taking their assignments, making sure what it is they're supposed to do, when they're supposed to do it, and getting it in. And I think for the most part we do a pretty good job of that. Nathan, would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So what I want to do today is kind of talk with you a little bit about what we cover here in the 9th grade. How we go through the curriculum and the way that we try to apply it to the individual students. Like I said, theory. Nathan just finished it, and what we found is that this year in particular, it seemed like a very, very short year. And so at the end, we were running as fast as we could in order to try to finish. And he's still a little bit out of breath. Just look at him.
Do you go through the entire timeline every year, or do you just do portions of it?
My class covers from creation all the way over to 1500 AD. So I always skip this part.
So that's the 9th grade year.
This is the 10th grade year.
Okay.
And all of that is the 9th grade forward go. Okay?
There's much more happening.
Yes, we have a lot more documentation and a lot more detail of what happens here. And so, but you can kind of see from history, I'm trying to cover basically 5,500 years of history in only about 8.5 months. It's an impossible task. You really can't do it. And so what I try to do with that is cover it in a broad perspective and then focus on certain individuals and try to do some depth with individual people so that they get a sense of the history and they get a sense of those important points and moments that are really crucial and key to history and the way that history has unfolded. Throughout it all, we're trying to look at the providential hand of God within history and the way that God has tried to direct things towards the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, this is something that sometimes is a great challenge because there are a lot of things in history where we don't really understand why they happened or how they happened, just because of incomplete information and incomplete records. And so that's where we try to do our 3Ring and do the reasoning and relating and try to figure out various things. And so we look at some things and we try to determine how they may have affected us in our day-to-day. And so when I'm teaching history, I'm always trying to think, why is this important to them today? Now, a lot of times they still may not understand at the end why it is that it's important. But it's something that hopefully as they go throughout this process, they're able to tie it all together into one, at least a coherent story of history. So
Where does 11th and 12th grade fit in on the timeline then?
11th grade covers American history. And so they would cover about from this point to the present.
So 10th is world history.
10th is world history, and I also teach world history. So I teach the first 5,500 years of world history. In the 10th grade, they teach the second half of world history, so to speak.
And then 12th is?
12th grade, they teach economics and government. So they focus less on history, more on the way that things are working in the world today, as well as various economic systems. So they look at communism, they look at capitalism, they look at democracy, they look at all various types of systems and relate those back to things that are happening today. So they're less about history, more about the application of that history to their lives. Does that make sense? Come on in. This is our new 11th grade core teacher, by the way.
Oh, welcome. What's your name? Heidi Parker. Heidi Parker.
We were just pointing out how much you get to teach in history versus the expanse of history that I get. So, and she's confined pretty much to North America too. That makes it even better. All right, so that is really the challenge that I have for the 9th grade, is trying to get through 5,500 years of history, spanning the entire globe, and do so in a way that they get both a picture of the general shape of history, as well as understanding those significant, important events. At the same time, at American Heritage, we really try to look at primary source documentation. And so one of the things that all of my students have is they have some reading materials that we deal with in both history and English. I should have Nathan bring his. Oh, he did. Look at that. See, this is a student who's prepared. Okay, so which one do you have? Okay, here's
history and this is English.
So here's his world history packet. What this is a collection of primary source documents which we have assembled. They then get to read these various primary source documents and try to relate them to the various historical subjects that we're talking about. So for example, I just kind of flipped open here to an Egyptian hymn, the great hymn to the Aten. It's a hymn that the Egyptians used to sing to the Nile. And we take a look at that, and they read that, and when we're talking about the Egyptian religion and mummification and all of, do you remember all that stuff, Nathan?
Yeah.
And why it is that they mummified people, why they built monuments to the dead, and other things, and then they do some reasoning and relating regarding this particular hymn and how it relates back to those various things that we're looking at. And then we look at some individuals. Who are the individuals that you remember us looking at in Egypt?
Egypt. That was the beginning of the year.
That was at the beginning of the year. See, I haven't gotten this grade finalized. No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
This is an unfair question because I didn't tell him he would be ready for this.
Yeah.
You remember Hatshepsut?
Yes.
How do you say his name?
That's a her, actually. Yeah. Hatshepsut, one of the ones we look at Akhenaten, who was an interesting Egyptian pharaoh, changed the Egyptian religion, went from a polytheistic religion to a monotheistic religion. It existed only for a short period of time, essentially his lifetime. We look at his son, Tutankhamun, one of the most famous pharaohs, not because he was a great pharaoh, but because after he died, he was never robbed. And as a result, his tomb is one of only 2 Egyptian tombs that hadn't been plundered when it was discovered, and it allows us to see a lot about Tutankhamun. And so we try to look at individuals' lives and how they relate to the grand scope of the history that we're looking at. We didn't get as far in the readings this year in history that I wanted to. We ended up running out of time. It seems to me like every year is just a horse race, trying to get from creation all the way to 1500. And this year we got pretty fast, we got pretty well up to Greece, and then we got into Rome, and then we kind of got bogged down in Rome. It's easy to get bogged down in Rome. And we got out of Rome, and we had how many weeks left, Nathan? 4 weeks. So we had to go from about here to the end here in a relatively short period of time. We did that largely by having the students do individual reports on things so that they got some depth. I'm going to be changing the way I do things next year a little bit, see if we can spend a little less time at the beginning and a little more time at the end. But it is something that is fun, is watching them go through this process. And as they begin to learn the importance of primary source documents, what primary source documents are, how to read primary source documents, because primary source documents are more difficult to read than the kinds of histories that we normally do, especially the kinds of primary source documents that we have for ancient history. So we, for example, we look at the Code of Hammurabi, one of the documents. Do you remember that one,
Yeah.
Nathan? The Code of Hammurabi, and there are parts where it's just broken. And we don't have all of the information. Part of it is just flaked away off of the tablets that we took them from. And so there are fragments. And so they look at some of these fragmentary translations where you have these big holes in the middle of it. And we struggle with that. And we talk about law and why law is important, what civilization is, and what are the things that create civilization and are important to civilization. What are the various pillars and standards that make up civilization? And how does civilization come about? And why is it so important for us to really be thinking about and understand civilization? Throughout all of the time periods that I look at, I do try to examine government. Government is something that we think is very important here. We're always trying to think governmentally. And we try to think about self-government as well as local government. And so we look at government. And so we spend time talking about the different forms of government that existed in those ancient worlds. We talk about monarchies, and we talk about oligarchies, and we talk about democracy, and we talk about tyranny, and we talk about mob rule, and we talk about all these various things, and a cycle known as the anacyclosis. The anacyclosis is a method that was identified by the Greek philosopher Plato for how various forms of governments shift into other forms of government. And then we try to see, and we try to apply those lessons from ancient history to our current day. And we spend a little bit of time looking at American government in the light of the anacyclosis and the turning of the wheel on various governmental systems. And we do a little bit of discussion and a little bit of debate as to what kind of a governmental system we have today. Do we have a monarchy, a democracy, an oligarchy, mob rule? What is it? And we have some fun with that. And it's kind of enjoyable to see them struggle with this concept. Because when they're in the high school, it's now time for them to start thinking and challenging and trying to go beyond just what it is that the teacher or the instructor is saying and applying the principles for themselves, for their own understanding. So we have some fun with that. Ideally, we would get past Rome into the Middle Ages, and we would also spend some time with the Far East, looking at India, at China, and looking at Japan. This year we never did get to the Far East. We hardly got much of the Middle Ages, which is unfortunate, but Mr. Dye has assured me he's going to take care of that at the beginning of next year.
So in the readings packet, you have all those sources, though? They're
Yes.
all there.
Yeah, I have in here somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 various primary sources.
Wow.
Most of them are somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 pages in length. So they're not terribly long, they're just little excerpts. And the students will have reading assignments 1 or 2 a week that they'll go into these, and then we talk about them and relate them to the larger subject.
Do you have in there kind of a background of the source, or how do you?
For this version, I do not. That's one of the things I hope to be able to write this summer. This is the first year that I've had this primary source packet,
Okay.
was last year. So it was put together and assembled during the summer last year. This year I hope to put some context for the primary sources.
Can't wait.
What we always talk about is context in the classroom. So I try to provide them that. Next year I hope that it's in the book form.
So how do you, are you teaching the language arts and the history as two separate courses, or are you integrating them into one course?
It's really difficult to try to integrate those two for this year. And that's because you think about English literature. English literature really doesn't start to exist until right around here. We have some very early works like Beowulf, which occur somewhere between 600 and 700 BC, or sorry, AD. But we really only have literature from here forward. So I've selected some literature that I think works into the historical topics, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But for the 9th grade, it's really difficult to try to integrate them.
But you are teaching them as two separate classes.
I do teach them as two separate classes, although I teach them back to back. And what that allows us is a great deal of freedom to borrow from one class or the other as necessary. So there are days when we'll have 2 hours of English, days when we'll have 2 hours of history. It allows a lot more freedom than what we would have at a traditional high school where you go to an hour and 20-minute class and it's taught by a history teacher, and then you go to an English class taught by an English teacher, and there's really no connection between the two of them. And so we're able to really tie those things in together quite a bit better. Was your hand up?
Yeah,
No.
but I don't want to interrupt your flow.
Go ahead.
Well, I just wondered, is this just a place for the gifted and super gifted, or is this a place for the average person?
It is a place for the average person.
Okay.
Okay? Nathan, would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. We have students that have learning disabilities. We have students that really struggle with these readings. This year I was able to get a parent volunteer to record all of the readings so that they can be listened to by students that struggle with reading. So even though what we're talking about are things which I think are on a higher level than what you might normally get in a traditional high school course, we try to provide all of the assistance that the students need in order for them to succeed.
Because I'm just seeing myself sinking and 3 kids here and all of the load, and I'm like, oh my gosh, can I handle it,
Would you also think there's some things that help with the being careful about your extracurricular activities? Like I'm still coming trying to figure out if I could find some more 15-minute mental preparation. But I have 10 kids, I have 5 coming to school next year. And so, and things like parent-teacher picks Thursday, so that you don't, if you're wanting to sit with your kids on every day for homework, you do the Thursday, there's no school Friday, and you didn't mess up your homework. You know what I mean? If you're gone Wednesday, a parent-teacher, there's no way you can help the homework for Thursday, if there's homework Thursday. So try to think, so I guess in that way, if you know your child is slower at reading, maybe my daughter, she reads a little faster than not, and yet we have to kind of protect her time more. So I think you're going to have to be proactive at home, and we wouldn't lie there. How's that?
But one of the things that we do try to do in the high school is, we try to put it on the shoulders of the student.
That's right.
So for example, Katie, you want to talk about that just a minute?
So for our family, I have 6 boys. The oldest went through high school here, and he's on a mission right now. And so I'll have 2 high schoolers, 10th grader and then a 9th grader. And by the time they hit 9th grade, they have to do it on their own. So 6th, 7th, and 8th are the challenge years where you have to turn it over to them, and they have to do it themselves. And those are the years they can fail, because in high school it counts. So we've gotten to 9th grade, and he knows how to do it. He's already taken the chances, and mom's stepped away, and he's suffered the consequences or whatever. And so he'll speak to it when he gets up, but he's learned to own his education.
And one of the things that I do is I recognize that not all of the students that are here in the 9th grade have been here for 5 or 6 years. And so I spend a lot of time at the beginning of the year talking about these kinds of things. I do them in my written portfolio class. We talk about how to take notes. We talk about recording things and how to make sure that they're on top of things. We do some reading skills and strategies and all kinds of other things in order to try to make sure that everybody understands This is how you do it, and this is how we get from point A all the way down to point Z. Okay? How much assistance did you give to Angela?
I just tried to figure your time up. So Angela's independent. I mean, I one time read one of the essays she wrote, and I go, we could even do better. But she's still, I mean, she's a good writer. But there's a few things it's like, I'm just not here for you right now. And I mean, honestly, yeah, we have a range of support.
With the younger kids.
Yeah, and some that were just busting out of special education by the time they came to the school. So I mean, so yes, the average can be here too.
Yeah.
And they have flourished by leaps and bounds. And so, yeah, we do have to be careful not to overschedule them. It's not a general authorities woman's comment.
Yeah.
And we have to be careful to help them get sleep and help them get a balance, so that exercise.
And that's something that's important, I think, generally anyway. As a father of 5 children, 4 of whom are now through, and I had my daughter in my class last year. She was in Nathan's class. You know, sometimes it's hard getting them to be where they need to be, but we just try to support them as best we can. And here at the school, we try to provide them the tools that they need in order so that they can succeed. Okay. Any other questions before we go on?
I would just comment with Nathan, I was there available for him. We would read things as he wanted us to read them. And I'll just give one example. There was an essay he was supposed to write. Let's remember it again. Literary criticism.
Yeah.
Literary criticism, is that it?
Yeah.
Mr. Hancock had trained him enough that Nathan came, it was either a weekend or a late night. He's like, I can't remember how I'm supposed to do this. So he looked it up on the web, what it meant. And once he knew what the definition of it was, he could hit the road and he knew exactly how to do it. So he'd had enough training in the classroom that he just needed a prompt from mom, a little bit, you know, and the website to say, okay, this is what it means. Oh, I know how to write this, and off he went. So it's just being available to help them.
So, and that's what we try to do. A good part of this is trying to train them so that they can do those things. Yes?
Along those lines, given the scope of the curriculum and context, would a child have a challenge integrating when they came in, let's say, 11th grade, not having learned these things or having these tools for the historical context?
You know, every year one of the things that I do is I interview the seniors as they're leaving the school. It's one of the great fun things that I get to do is interview them for graduation. And this year there were about 1/3 to almost 1/2 had come to American Heritage in their senior year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, almost every one of them said that it was a challenge because it was difficult. But every single one of them also said that it was one of the most rewarding years that they'd ever had in school.
How many graduates did you have?
We had 36 graduates this year. So, is it a challenge? Yes, it is. Is it a doable challenge? Yes, it is. One of the great things about the school is there is an environment among the student body, partly because it's so small, partly because of the 7 principles that are taught, partly because of just the general spirit of the school. But they help each other, they love each other, they stand with each other, they support each other. And even those that struggle, they're able to find their support system, their friends that can help them out and push them along. And the teachers also are quite kind and generous and willing to explain things as many times as necessary in order for the student to understand. So I would say that we get quite a few that come in the 11th and 12th grade, and that they do thoroughly enjoy it, and they have everything that they need in order to succeed. Okay, anything else? Let me take just a couple of minutes and try to talk about the literature part. So that's the history and the grand scope of it. Literature, we have a similar packet. You want to hold up your literature packet there?
Used it a lot, so it's right in the binder. Not disregard for it, so.
It's about the same size as the history one. These are various pieces of literature that I've selected that are separate from the books and the novels that we read. A couple of years ago, we made a change in the literature curriculum here. We used to do English literature to 1500. Now, any of you that know English literature would recognize immediately that that would be a really difficult piece of literature to read. Everything would have been written, you would be reading everything in translation, because it would have been either written in Old English or in Middle English. And you would also recognize that 95% of it was poetry, that most of it is stuff that is only taught at the college level. And so it was really difficult for the 9th grade students to try to relate to that literature. And so we made a change. And what the change I made was, as we called it, Foundations of English Literature. So that we are looking at some various foundational things. We're looking at the concept of story. What is a story, and what is the structure of a story, and why are stories so important? And I try to look at this from what's known as an archetypal perspective. We look at the hero journey. The way that the hero goes through a journey or a quest, arriving at the conclusion, having achieved great and wonderful things. Okay? And what that arc does is it puts things into a context which allows students to relate it to many other things, including the life of Christ, which is the ultimate hero journey. And so we begin to look at pieces of literature from that perspective, where we look at plot, setting, structure, all of those things in regards to the hero journey. And then we begin to look in depth at various stories which fall into that kind of structure. There are 3 main pieces of literature that we deal with. The first is Beowulf, okay? The great Old English epic. We use a translation by Seamus Heaney. It's a beautiful and wonderful translation, right, China?
It actually is.
One of my other former students here. It's a beautiful translation, and we look at Beowulf and how Beowulf goes through the hero journey and how he ultimately is a symbol or a type of Christ. And they look at that and they recognize various pieces of the story that show that Beowulf is more than just an interesting guy who fought monsters and defeated them, except for at the end where he died. And so, sorry. I do that to my students too. I ruin it right at the beginning for them so that they recognize that he's going to die. But it's a wonderful story. I love it. And by the end of this, they write an essay where they go through and they compare Beowulf to a scriptural character. And they do a comparison essay where they try to equate them, Beowulf and that scriptural character, into the parts of the hero journey. Okay? So that's an important one. After that, we look at The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Okay, and my students always are a little bit confused when we first talk about this, because they actually read this here in 3rd grade, I think. And so they've all read this, they've seen the movie, and they're kind of excited about it because they know that in comparison to Beowulf, it's a really easy read. And by this time, they're really quite anxious for an easy read. But what we're doing is we take this easy read and we then look at it from a different perspective, and we try to go deeper. We try to look at the symbolism that is less obvious in the book. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is a story about Christ. That's what it is. But there are 3 aspects of the story which are not quite so obvious. And so they're looking at the use of color in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. They're looking at the use of food in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And the last thing that they're looking for is this concept that C.S. Lewis came up with, where the inside is greater than the outside. It's larger than the outside. And they look at those 3 things. Now, those aren't things that they looked at in the 3rd grade. And so we talk about those, we identify those symbols, we talk about the differences and how they all relate. And then, again, at the end of that, they write an essay. Which one did you pick?
Inside Life and Outside.
China, which one did you pick?
There was a 4th topic that we had, it was stone, and I did the...
Last year I allowed you guys to do the one on stone.
I enjoyed that one.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Which is another one of the things which they're able to look at is this concept of stone. It's all over in the language in the wardrobe, and why it is that things are stone sometimes and not stone other times. The color of stone, the color of rock. It's a very interesting little piece. Do you remember which one Angela did?
She did food.
She did food?
That's the article she read.
Okay.
She did food.
So the students are allowed to pick between various subjects, and they write an essay on it. Throughout all of this, we're teaching them MLA format, and it's one of the structural things that they're being taught. They need to write their essays in proper format, do proper inline citations, have a works cited page, do it all the way that it's supposed to be. And by the end of it, how do you feel about MLA citation page? Be honest.
It was a lot easier once we continually did it. The first time, it was just like, we have to do it this way, why can't we just get it on the paper? But I actually liked it towards the end of the year.
Okay.
Using it.
China, what about you?
I don't have to worry about it when I go to 10th grade and you write a paper, I just go, okay, new format, done.
You know,
It's rather nice.
and that's the great thing is that once you learn it, then you have it, right?
Yeah.
I think that in other schools, I've gone to different school systems and stuff, and from charter to public, and we did homeschool, but I did give someone else, my daughter, to help with writing when I was over my head, and to get some tutors. I'm not strong there. But I feel like that I expect that my daughter will enter college completely prepared, seamless, completely prepared. And whereas I have seen from, Brother Hancock knows my daughter, and she's capable. She was the English German scholar at graduation. She can write. I did not help her in class, because anybody that's on my writing, you know. And so, and because I hired other helpers, but I felt like the middle school helpers were way more, well, she had some gifted teachers too, but it was a struggle to transfer into the college level. It was hard for her, and I feel like that grateful that this, so when we say, oh, it's going to be hard, it's worth it, because you need them ready for college. So it's going to be hard for your sons and daughters that come to American Heritage, wherever they start, but in the end, they will have so much more hope and capacity, and they just won't have to deal with so much.
Yeah. And that's what we're striving for, is we're preparing them to be instruments in the hands of the Lord as they go out into the world, whether they go on mission, whether they go to college, whatever it is that they do, we want them to be ready to do whatever it is that the Lord wants them to do. So here in the 9th and the 10th grade, we focus on MLA citation format. Okay. In the 11th and the 12th grade, we shift over to APA, so that they will leave here having known the two most common citation and formatting systems that are used in universities today. So that's kind of where we go with that. Now, after Narnia, we've looked at the hero journey, we've looked at the quest, we've looked at various old stories as well as modern stories, we've looked at King Arthur, we've looked at all of this great body of history, and then we try to wrap it all up into The Lord of the Rings, which is in many ways the monster that they get to read. It's over 1,000 pages. But by the end of it, I think they genuinely enjoy it. And I know China really enjoyed it a great deal. Nathan, how did you feel about it?
I had read it 2 times before, just rereading. And reading it that time, it really hit me just how much symbolism there is in that book. And just the principles he's woven in there that are just under the surface, but if you don't look for them, you won't see them.
Okay. What about Angela? Did she talk much about it?
I think she read it before, but it was a lot harder for her this time. I think she was tired. You know, she sometimes comes into school a little tired. I think I'm the one that struggles with keep protecting her back.
Okay.
You know. So I think she, I don't know. Do you think she enjoyed it? She wrote.
I think she was
she
fine.
had comments with you.
Yeah, I think she did enjoy it. I don't think it was one that she said, just that book again. My daughter did not enjoy it. Now, partly she probably didn't enjoy it because she's heard about it all of her life from me. It's one of my favorite books.
How much time are you spending on each piece? So is that like the second half of the year, basically, or?
This here is, how much, we've spent, what, 10 weeks on this?
Something like that, yeah.
So we spent 10 weeks on this book. We go through the rest of this. there's 300 pages in the packet, plus this, and then, well, there is a lot of reading. We do a
So
lot
you're
of,
saying the literature has 300 pages, what are the other, what else is in the literature packet besides these?
the literature packet includes short stories, myths. We do Greek and Roman mythology. We do Norse mythology in here. We also do the stories of King Arthur. So we have selections from various Arthurian stories, including the Morte d'Arthur and
So
other
it really
more.
does fit in with your history.
And we really tried to tie it in, and I tried to do the best I could to try to pull in the ancient information and apply it to the literature that they're reading. So it's kind of my hope was to dovetail all that together as much as possible. And that's one of the reasons why I changed it. By being able to bring in Norse and Greek mythology, we tie into these other ancient civilizations. They were left out under the old system.
And then how do you incorporate the writing element?
We already mentioned it a little bit, but they write essays, a lot of essays. I had one parent come into me, I guess about 3 months into the year, and says, "Boy, you love to have them write."
It's great preparation.
And it is good preparation. And one of the things that I believe is that you get better by doing. And so I do. I have them write. I have them read each other's writing periodically. I have them, there's a couple of assignments where they're required to read what they wrote to somebody else. They're required to have somebody else read their writing and critique it for them. We look at various models. I have various essays that they look at and they read those as well. The various things that they write typically relate to the two courses, either the historical period or to the English literature. And so I'm trying to integrate the writing part into the two other classes. And what I tend to do with that is sometimes I do a better job with one course and sometimes I do a better job with the other course. So it kind of gets a little bit lopsided. In one term, for example, written portfolio might be mostly relating to the English literature class. The next term mostly relates to the history class. But by the end of the year, it's, I hope, pretty balanced.
May I ask a question of the
Sure.
students? Can you guys give me a picture of comparing 9th grade to 10th grade, or 8th grade to your last year? I'm thinking about how Mrs. Yamada spent a lot of time reading from the works to the kids, like from David Copperfield and stuff like that. Whereas in 9th grade, they take it home and they do so many chapters at home and just discuss it in class. What was that like for you guys? Was it a good transition? Was it similar?
8th grade was more of, okay, here's this, read it in class, and then give a little assignment of, okay, go 4R it yourself. Whereas 9th grade is more of, go home, read it yourself, and we can have these big discussions in class, discussing things, going in depth, which I liked a little more than 8th grade.
China?
For 8th grade, it was mostly an in-class reading because of David Copperfield, and that was more of a college, high school book for us, and so it was somewhat of a leap for us. We understood that. And then we would have maybe a little bit reading at home, so we could somewhat get comfortable with it. In 9th grade, it's somewhat the opposite of, 9th grade, it's somewhat the opposite of that. We have some reading in class where we somewhat get the feel of what maybe he's looking for, trying to show us. And then at home, we try to find it on our own, and then we bring it to the discussion in class.
Okay. So it's a step into independence and...
Yeah, and that's really what we're trying to do now. China just finished the 10th grade, so she's starting her 11th grade.
Oh, okay.
How did it work in the 10th grade? I mean, did you feel much more comfortable going into Mr. Dye's class? Or?
I actually did, yeah.
So the idea is to try to get them ready to then go on through the rest of the high school where they do most of the reading is on their own time at home.
Yeah, Angela liked that better. I remember she did make that comment. She likes to read it at home because she can read it faster. She can get through it faster. And then also, there's more discussion too that you can have that she said because she can get through it faster. That's a reason.
With, how do you feel about if they're reading it, listening to it on, or iPod or whatever while they're reading it, or like the materials you said in the history syllabus looking thing, that you had a parent record that, or some of these materials recorded as well? Just for kids
All
that
of
read
these-
super slow or have trouble comprehending the depth of these materials.
All of these have audio recordings available to them.
And you're okay with
The parent has, our volunteer has created audio recordings for the entire English packet. In addition, there are commercially available audio recordings for
Sure.
these three.
Is this something that you can download from the school? These,
The packet is, for these ones, no. They're commercially
but I mean,
available.
for that, those recordings are available to download?
It's not all grades or just 9th grade.
10th grade, the same parent is starting to record readings for 10th grade as well. And so as we continue this process, we're trying to provide that assistance for them. Not everything they read is going to have an audio recording available. For my students, I always request that if they do listen to the audio recordings, that they also follow along with the book. I do recognize, however, that not every student is able to, they're not a visual learner. Many of them are auditory learners. And I had a couple of really strong auditory learners this year, and if they hadn't been able to listen to it, they would have been completely lost. But by being able to listen to it, they were able to really do quite well in the class. So we do provide those accommodations and those resources for them in order to allow every child to be able to try to meet their own level of success.
Thanks to the students as well.
So with the writing, we're trying to do that, and the writing culminates in a project that relates to the history class, and that's the very end. The students are given at the end of the year a research project, and they need to research through academic sources a person from our timeline, where they have to have a certain number of sources, they have to have primary sources, they have to put it all together into a multimedia presentation, and then they come and they give approximately a 15-minute presentation to the classmates. It's a fairly long presentation. It's probably the longest presentation any of the students have, well, many of them have ever given. And it's supposed to be academic in nature, and it's multimedia, and they include with that their footnoted notes and a works cited page, so that it's all intended to assist them learning how to research through academic sources, how to put together information, drawing from multiple sources and multiple points of view, and then to present that in an interesting manner and informative manner to their peers. That's kind of the culminating writing project. China, who was the person that you did?
I did Galileo Galilei.
That's right, remember that?
Richard the Lionheart.
Richard the Lionheart. Who did Angela do?
Marco Polo.
Marco Polo. My daughter did Leonardo da Vinci. And so we have, we have a broad range of people. Many of them are from the Middle Ages, which is how they kind of pick up some of that Middle Ages information if we tend to skip it. But it's a good project.
Is it like a biographical project, or is it exploring some question within that individual?
I'm going to say what I say to my students all the time that irritates them, yes. It's one of their most hated answers, but they give me two choices when I say yes. It could be either one of those. It has to be biographical. It has to focus, though, on particularly on a question or an event. One aspect of the life, and it also has to relate or tell everybody how it is that it's important to history. Why do we care about that today? And so they have those three basic main things that they have to look at in that project. Many of them for this project make models, and you can see some of the models that we have. I've kept just a few over the years. I can't keep them all, unfortunately, but I've kept a few, and they're nice little models that they put together as part of their multimedia presentations. This year, at the end of the year, we also tried to do Romeo and Juliet. For China's year, we had done it in February, which is where it probably fit better. But this year we did it at the end of the year. We didn't have nearly enough time, did we? So we didn't get to have as much fun as we normally do. But one of the things I do like about Romeo and Juliet is it's a wonderful piece of literature that the students are able to relate to because they're the same age as the characters, and feeling some of the same things that the characters feel. And they get to do an adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, where they get to put it into a different time and a different place, and then they do a puppet show. The puppet shows this year weren't quite as good, but you didn't have nearly as much time. They knew that. Last year, the puppet shows were really quite excellent, and the year before that, they were also quite excellent. They spent a fair amount of time writing scripts, understanding about drama, creating puppets, and then they perform the puppet shows. Parents are invited. And that's another thing that I always invite parents into my classroom. Last year I had a parent, she would come almost every Monday. And she would come and she would sit through the first period of the day, almost every Monday. And it was great having her here. And her boys didn't mind at all. She had 2 sons that were in class. They didn't mind at all, and it was wonderful to have her there. And I've had other parents that just come in and sit down for a while and enjoy.
Is Romeo and Juliet the Shakespeare piece for 9th grade?
It is.
Not Henry the V?
Not Henry V.
Okay.
Originally we did Henry V, but I switched out of Henry V 2 years ago. Romeo and Juliet is a much more structurally sound play than Henry V. Henry V structurally has some problems. The 5th act, we're just there in Paris.
So it should be Henry IV.
We should probably do Henry IV Part 2. It would, structurally would work better for what I'm trying to do. Romeo and Juliet, though, just really resounds with the students. It's something that they really can appreciate. We read a version of it that's been edited by me. So it's fairly safe.
Is that in your packet also?
It's in the packet. In fact, it's right here. You can see all of it in here.
Are these included in our tuition, or is it?
Yes. In fact, all of these books are included in the tuition. And we, with the exception of Beowulf, the students are given the books, and they're now their books. We teach them to write in them, to annotate them, to mark them. It's one of the great things that we get here that you often don't get at public schools, because they're just borrowing the books. Beowulf is an exception to that. I keep going back and forth on that. 2 years ago, they got their book. Last year, we tried to read it in class. I don't know what we're going to do next year.
We actually didn't get to keep them.
Oh, 2 years ago, you didn't get to keep them? It was 3 years ago.
Christopher got his.
Christopher got his. So I keep going back and forth with Beowulf what to do. We do read Beowulf in class. It is a more difficult text. It is poetry. Seamus Heaney is a wonderful poet. It's a wonderful translation, but it is a little more difficult to read. Nathan, you want to stand up and just give your 2.5 minute spiel?
Sure. Okay. So yeah, the literature pieces, Beowulf, Narnia, we did Lord of the Rings, Romeo and Juliet. We used the hero journey a lot once we learned about it. It's this, well, the basic one is the 17-stage thing. Shows how the hero gets on the journey, how he develops over the journey, and what happens once he gets home. And so we used that to tie into several Greek myths for Narnia, for Lord of the Rings. Several times in class we were given assignments of, okay, find so many examples of this stage from this reading or this book. And so that was challenging at times, but yeah. So I forgot where I was going with that. Okay. So we also did Greek myths and Norse myths, which I didn't know much about, but using that to help tie into Lord of the Rings, there was a few things that reading it before using the Norse myths helped out, such as, for example, the Wergild. It was this ancient ritual, code of, well, law. So each person's life had like a price on it, and so it had to be either paid by somebody else's life or in some other way, like money. And so this is kind of where you get the concept of revenge and people fighting back and forth, like you killed my father, so and so, blah blah blah. And so it really helped with a lot of things, seeing, okay, this is where that's come from, and this is where we have it now. We also, during literature at the beginning, we discussed different creation myths, and also myths on the flood with Noah, especially the Epic of Gilgamesh. It was nice to see, rather from the biblical view, more of a world view of, okay, this is what most people think of the flood, or this is what a primary source document of it looks like. And so that was really nice, just to see the other side. Okay. And so this year, I really got into the thing of, this is my time, this is my school, I'm in charge of it. And so parents are still there to help and to support you, but this is mine, I have to take care of it. I even got into the habit of carrying a little notebook around, writing down every single assignment just so that I didn't forget it. And when I didn't, I would forget it and then get a bad grade, and yeah, didn't end well. So, I really like reading Lord of the Rings. I've read it before, like I said, I've read it before, but the symbolism and the lessons that I learned from it, so I've got mine here. It's pretty worn just because of how much we use it. I don't know if you can see, but I marked it pretty well, just because, well, just because it's such a big of a book. We've got this whole reading guide given to us. We didn't stick to this very much, but we had the occasional quiz where we're supposed to, if you had read the chapter, you would know. If you hadn't, you'd fail. Okay, so, and throughout this we were given, how many was it? 17, no, 20, okay, I thought it was 12. So it's about 20 different themes or things we were supposed to look for. It was challenging keeping track of them, so I just kept this with me the entire time. Okay, I need to be looking for this, where can I find evidences of that? And at the end, where, did we do 2 essays or just one?
You just did one.
Okay. And yeah. I still can't remember where I was going with that.
Sounded old people.
You're doing great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Writing assignments, maybe?
Oh, writing assignments. So, the bulk of the assignments was either reasoning or essays. And so we did a lot of essays actually. At the beginning of the year it was more of a 5-paragraph essay, and later on it became 1,000 word essays and 1,500 word essays. Those were the main things, and it was just the word count. And so if you write over, try and minimalize it down. Learn, for one of them we were required to shorten 250 words and edit it. That was pretty hard. Just, okay, you compacted it down this much, okay, do a little more. And so, doing that, yes, it's nicer once it's all flowy and descriptive, but it's also nice to see it all compacted. This is what, here, this is what it is. So, that was nice.
The history class, what was your experience there?
Oh.
Any comments?
We had a lot of lectures. We were supposed to take notes because we had tests, but didn't take notes, you'd probably do worse on the test than you would if you didn't. Well, if you did take notes. Like he said, during written portfolio, we discussed, okay, these are different types of formal note-taking, and so we had to develop our own style of, like, shorthand, basically, of how we were supposed to take notes. And it wasn't hard to take notes, and it wasn't hard to listen to the lectures. He would help us he would help us understand certain things by giving us examples. Like, so, for example, when we started to learn about civilization, it was, okay, this person's really good at doing this person's really good at doing that. And so if they work together, this person can focus on that, and this person can focus on that. That's how you build up a community. Everyone's doing their special thing and helping each other. So it was really nice to work on that.
All right, thank you, Nathan. Nathan's great for doing this. It was actually Katie that was asked to help. Katie and I were talking at a dinner a couple of nights ago, and we said, no, why don't we just have Nathan do it? And so that's what we ended up with. So Nathan kind of got thrown to the wolves by both of us.